Well, today I'm here to talk about some of the secrets about making money that the rich don't always reveal. And many people think I'm going to tell them secrets about real estate, or how you get into it, or how you do really well with it. And there's plenty of time to get onto those. But for today, I want to talk about things that are seemingly unrelated to real estate. And I say seemingly because at their core, if you don't exhibit these attributes and don't follow these rules, then I think your chances of success are pretty small. And the first one has to do with this magical thing called integrity. Because you see, when I was a young man, I wanted to find out what the rich had in common. I wanted to know, what do the rich do, so that if I could emulate those things, I thought, perhaps somewhat naively, then I'd have a good chance at being rich. And I could hardly find anything that the rich had in common. It wasn't age, it wasn't gender, it wasn't religious belief, it wasn't country of birth, or whether they were an immigrant family or not, or firstborn, lastborn, anywhere in between. I could only find two things that the rich had in common. And the first is that almost without exception, the rich had integrity. Now, when I was 17 conducting this study, I didn't give much credence to that. I thought, okay, integrity, what else? What else do they have in common? And the only other thing that I found that they had in common is that the rich either tended to make their money in real estate, or they might have made it in other things, but they held their wealth in real estate. And I thought, that's interesting. If they either make it in real estate or end up putting the proceeds from some other venture into real estate, then real estate is the thing I wanted to get into. So of the two things I found that the rich had in common, I focused on the latter, the real estate aspect. And it hasn't done me bad, but it always lingered in the back of my mind, this thing about integrity. And as time went on, I studied it more and more and observed it more and more. And that's really what I want to talk about today. This is one of the secrets of being fabulously successful. Because if you think about it, if you were to go out and rob a bank today, say you and a bunch of two of your buddies, three of you rob a bank, assuming you don't get caught, would you not be rich instantly? And the answer would have to be, well, yes, of course. And so you might say, well, what's wrong with that scenario? Well, in order to rob a bank, in case you don't know, you need the assistance of a few accomplices. And one of them is you need a getaway driver, someone who's sitting in the getaway vehicle ready to hit the accelerator as soon as you've loaded all the loot into the car. But here's what happens. You and your two buddies come out of your successful heist hauling this big loot behind you, this big bag of money. And just as you manage to swivel it and load it into the trunk or the boot of your car, your new friend, the getaway driver, decides that he can hit the accelerator and split the proceeds with three fewer people. In other words, in order to rob a bank, when you recruit an assistant, you recruit them from the ranks of those with integrity or without integrity. And the answer is, of course, without integrity, because otherwise they wouldn't help you rob a bank. So you end up doing all the work. You might get caught, you might get hurt in the process, and the getaway driver gets all the money anyway. In other words, the moral is, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So when I say integrity, I mean people whose word is their honor, right? They say they're going to do something and they do it, barring unforeseen circumstances. I don't think anyone drives to a meeting in the expectation that they'll have two flat tires, because one flat tire, technically you might be able to fix in 5 or 6 minutes. But if you get a second flat, the chances are that you're stuck there for a while, unless you have one of those cans of inflatable tire repair things, and that won't fix every problem. So we live our lives not budgeting for dual flat tires, and for the most part that works. And I don't recall a single instance in my life when I had two flat tires consecutively, like at the same time. So in general, it's okay if you are late for a meeting, if there's a genuine reason. I had it today. I was going to a meeting. There was unexpected roadworks. And it's just around the corner from me. I don't always check to see if there are roadworks around the corner. And as it turns out, I still got there on time. But things like that can happen. I'm not talking about that level of integrity. I'm talking about whether you have a pattern of consistently saying one thing and doing another. And I love that expression, that what you do speaks so loudly to me, I can't hear what you're saying. In other words, what you do is more important for me than what you say you're going to do. So this thing about integrity is so crucial, because I've found, just as there are those expressions, birds of a feather flock together, people with integrity tend to hang with other people with integrity. So if you've got a band of thieves, they tend to hang out and figure out ways of robbing banks or robbing elderly folk on park benches or whatever it might be. And similarly, if you're amongst a group of people who are always saying, wow, what's the latest opportunity? What can we do to provide a service or a product that is so high in demand that we can sell this company for a great margin and everyone wins? Because when you think about it, someone who creates a company and a product that everyone wants, everyone wins from that. The creators of a company do, they IPO it or sell it for millions of dollars. But the people who buy those products or services, they seem to be happy with it, or else they wouldn't be buying it, right? And then, the people in the shops who sell them, they're happy because it provides them with work, and on it goes. So in that sense, there aren't really any losers. And that is what you've got to do. You'll find that people with integrity tend to come up with ideas and end up doing things where there are no losers. Everyone wins. And then if you get on that bandwagon, it's so tempting to do more of that. Whereas I imagine if you get on the bandwagon of robbing banks, then all you can do is try and figure out, how can I get more money with my next heist? Because there's a risk of getting caught. So if I'm going to risk getting caught, I want to, make off with 3 million and not 300,000, or 30 million and not 3 million. And I think by the nature of these activities, people always get into more and more trouble until eventually they get caught. Whereas the same escalation of concept goes when you're doing something that kind of benefits everyone. So in that context, I really think integrity is underrated. Very few people talk about it. And I've had the privilege of teaching on Tony Robbins' stage on and off for nearly 20 years. And I heard that one of the reasons why I was selected for that is I was one of the few people that actually spoke about integrity and taught it. And it's, one of these things that I think you should think hard about. And here's the interesting thing. Integrity is not genetic. That means if you're not happy with your current level of integrity, if you think there's room for improvement, then you can decide in a proverbial heartbeat that you can improve your level of integrity. And to the extent that you will, I think you'll have more good things coming to you, including more money. And you might doubt that, but I would suggest you should give it a go, because you never know how it can affect your life. Even if you're already very morally upright and you think you do things the right way, just having more integrity can enhance the sorts of people that you attract to you and the ability for you to do things that you otherwise may not be able to do. Anyway, there's a thought. So that's one secret. Have high standards of integrity and ever expanding and increasing standards of integrity. To the extent that you do that, I think what happens in your life will show that you're being rewarded for it in some karmic way. If that's too ephemeral, if that's too difficult to visualize, then here's a second secret of the rich that I want to share with you. A lot of people who perhaps don't achieve much, they don't tend to be on this constant path of learning. They claim that they went to school to learn. Well, to me, school, technically I learned stuff there, but it was just the starting ground. My real education began when I finished school. Because if you're not learning every day, if you're not trying things and doing things differently from what you've done before, and making mistakes along the way. And by the way, making mistakes, it's good. It's only when you repeat mistakes that it's silly. In fact, I would go one step further and say, if you're not making enough mistakes, then you're not trying enough new things. If you're not making any mistakes, then you must surely be doing every day things that you've done before that resulted in no mistakes being made. And you probably feel pretty good about it. I'm leading a good life. I'm not making any mistakes. Yeah, well, you're not trying anything new either. So get out there. Be willing to make mistakes. Just remember that repeating mistakes is silly. So be willing to make mistakes. But most people, they tend to watch soap operas on TV. And just my personal view on TV, there's some good programming out there and good educational things and even good entertainment value programs. Comedies or whatever that are really worthwhile watching, unwinding and all that. But in general, TV programs are written by script writers who have one aim in mind, and that is to make as much money as they can. And so to make money, they need to captivate an audience. There needs to be intrigue. That's why you'll never see a TV program where one of the couples says to the other, honey, I really love you. Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. I love you too. There's no drama in that. That won't get people to come back and watch. They need there to be backstabbing and the wrong people sleeping with the other people and intrigue and who killed JR and all these things That's what sells. So when they get enough people hooked on a program because they've got this crazy scriptwriter's fantasy, I always call it, then enough people watch the ads. And in different countries, they have different amounts of ads, different frequencies with which the ads can appear. But here we have a lot of ads, and usually they're about 10 decibels louder than the normal programming. And to me, it's a distraction watching something, especially if it's mildly interesting, that's constantly interrupted by being admonished to take yet another tablet to cure some unknown disease and be aware of all the side effects, or, buy this car or eat this food and all that sort of thing. And it's all right. I know it's a free world. People watch it voluntarily. I'm not saying they shouldn't advertise. It's just I choose not to watch programming that exposes me to that. So the secret, one of them, apart from having integrity, is to learn. And you can't learn from soap operas, in my view. So you have to read books, and you have to be very careful about which books you choose to read. You can't pick one up at random. And usually if you get into a mood to read a good book, you will mention it to other people. Those friends who think reading is for idiots and they'd rather be robbing banks, they will tend not to associate with you so more. I know that sounds pretty radical, but it's kind of true, even in a milder form. And you'll be gravitated towards other people who've just read fascinating books and are really excited to share what they've just read. And they'll give you recommendations. You might read recommendations aloud and you might get some. You might think, well, that's no good, not what I thought it would be. But there are other things that turn out to be better than you thought they'd be. So you get into this habit of reading books. And if you can learn something new every day, do you know how much that can change your world in just a year? I'm still in awe at what's going on around me and how the world works. And I'm annoyed at some things that go wrong, but I'm very happy with some things that go right. And so, the trick is to just get into a habit of reading. You don't have to read a lot. It doesn't have to be 3 or 4 hours a day. It's just like physical fitness. You don't need to go running for 4 hours a day. In fact, to do that, you'd have to be a pretty diehard, hardcore marathon runner or something. And eventually your knees would give out and your intestines would all be mush. So most people, when they say they want exercise, they're not talking about 4 hours a day. They're talking about a 20-minute workout or an hour workout. And some days they might skip one and then they do 40 minutes. And reading's the same thing. Instead of using your electronic device to scroll at night in the hour before you go to sleep, and they say that the blue light coming off the screens tends to play havoc with your ability to sleep, why not read a good book? And by a good book, I mean a book where once you're into it, you kind of want to know what happens next. And that could be a novel, but it could also be a book on something that teaches you more about how to make money, maybe how to become financially free through investing in real estate. There are so many books out there on this topic. And I know I've contributed a few. I've got quite a few books in my name. But I'm not even saying you should read my books. I think it is impossible to read just about any book on real estate and not learn something. Now, there are some that you'll say, well, they're not very well written. I think I might have been able to do a better job than the author, although chances are you didn't. Or you might say, I don't like the sequence that these chapters appear in or whatever. But instead of looking for a valid reason to criticize the book, if you look for a valid reason to praise it, you might surprise yourself with what you can come across. So I always say there's no such thing as a bad book on real estate. There are just better books and not so good books. But even if you read a book that isn't that well written and you learn just one thing, that one thing might generate another $10,000 a year for you or $3,000 a month or not. It doesn't matter. It might give you an inspiration as to what you can do to improve the value of a house without spending much money. The point is, by reading, you will open up possibilities that didn't exist before you took up this opportunity of reading. And reading is so inspirational. It's far more involved than watching a program on TV because you have to turn the pages, you have to think, you have to create the images of what the author is describing. And so it becomes a bit more of a proactive activity than just watching a film. You can watch a film, and even if you're half falling asleep, if you hear the soundtrack, you get a general idea of what's going on. You can't do that with a book. The moment your eyes close and you stop reading, then you stop gaining information. Anyway, that's a finer detail. That's kind of irrelevant. But I would admonish you, read. If you could read one book a week for an entire year, not only will your life be different, your outlook on life will be different. The things you know about will be different. The things you believe are possible will be different. And that's if you read books in general and read a wide variety of topics. It's also good for your brain. Your brain is this muscle, basically. It's like a big lump of elastic. And if you exercise it, you will make it stronger, and it will make new connections that it hasn't made before. So do something you don't normally do. Try different activities. Try different games that come up. I'm not saying be addicted to games. I don't have any subscription to gaming sites and all that sort of thing. The game I play is the game of real estate. And to me, there's plenty of excitement and joy, and the winnings you get from that than any game you can put on a screen or on a board for me. I'll occasionally play a board game, but take the game of Monopoly. I used to play that a lot as a kid with my friend Dean. We made our own board. We got sick of the board that folded out of the box. So we got cardboard boxes, big ones, and we unfolded them and lined them along the living room of my friend Dean's farmhouse. And we drew on them and all the places you could land on and the go thing and what you got when you pass go. And sometimes we changed the rules. We made them up. We didn't have to stick to the conventional rules out there. And we would have dinky toys, little model cars that we would use to go around the edges of this massive living room. I used to play Monopoly a lot, quite like the game. And sometimes people say to me, why don't you play Monopoly anymore? And the truth is, I play Monopoly every day in real life. Not quite with the rules. I don't go past the thing magically called go and they give me a lump of money. But essentially, I land on properties which I end up buying, and then people pay me rent. Now, do they relish the fact that they're paying me rent? Do they lie awake at night with excitement because they can give me some money? No, but they're realists, and whether they're commercial tenants, which is my particular preference, or residential tenants, they know that if they weren't paying rent to me, they'd be paying rent to someone else until they can buy the house they live in or the place they work out of. They're going to be renting. So they know that they're going to be paying rent, and honestly, after a while, they'd rather pay rent to me than to some random landlord because there are certain benefits of renting from me. It's the way I treat them in general. I give them bonuses if they've stayed there a certain length of time. On residential tenants, you might think this too. TVs are so cheap now. Why don't you buy them a 24-inch high definition UH whatever TV and give it to every tenant who's been there for more than 2 years? And I can tell you something, a tenant who's only been there for 1 year and they're wondering whether or not to move or not, they might just decide to stay because they know that they too can probably get a TV if they stay an extra however many months it is to make up that 2-year mark. And you might think that's bribery and corruption. It's a trivial thing. If the tenant thought about it, the TV is worth hundreds of dollars, not thousands anymore. And their rent for the year is probably worth many thousands of dollars. So in that sense, it's not even a fair, well, I wouldn't say fair, it's not unfair, but it's not a massive incentive. It's only a couple of $100. And yet it's little things like that might do it. Or you might make it something else. You might make it some kitchen utensil or a fryer or a new microwave or who knows what. Doesn't matter what it is. But if you treat people well, this doesn't just apply to your tenants, but in life in general, if you treat people well, they'll want to do more with you. And I get on particularly well with most of my tenants. There are always a few who probably don't get on with anyone. But in general, if you listen to what their concerns are, then often you can help them. I'll give you a real example. I had one tenant who'd been a tenant, he and his wife, and he had 2 kids. They'd been a tenant for about 5 or 6 years. Always renewed their lease when it came for that. And then one time when it came for lease renewal, he said, Dolf, I'm sorry, I'm not going to renew this time. And I don't know what you would have said, but I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. You've been great to work with. You've always paid the rent on time. If there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. If I can write a reference letter for your next landlord, I'm happy to do so. And then I said one more thing, and I'm just curious. Before I say what it is, I ask you, what would you have said? Because what I said to this tenant is, do you mind me asking why you're leaving? And he said, no, not at all. My wife is pregnant again, and we need a bigger house. We've got 3 bedrooms here, but we've run out of space. We're going to need a 4-bedroom house. Well, that was a very candid, honest response. And I don't know what you would have said to that. But what I said is the following. I said, tell me, if I built you an extra bedroom on this house, would you consider staying? And he looked at me and he said, oh my gosh, of course I would. It would involve all the hassle and cost of moving. It will, will remove the hassle and cost of moving. It will remove the need perhaps to change the schools of my existing 2 kids that go to school. It will make life easier. No change of address forms. Yes, it will save us time and hassles. So I had to make a calculation. Could I justify building another bedroom? Well, the tenant knew that he'd probably have to pay more rent with an extra bedroom. And in those days, the going rates for a 3-bedroom house relative to a 4-bedroom house, the difference was about $400 a month. So I said, well, it'll be the rental rate of a 4-bedroom had to be about $400 a month extra. And he said, no, I'd have to pay that anywhere else anyway. Well, you do the math on this. $400 a month is $4,800 a year. Round it up to $5,000, just bear. So it's roughly $5,000 extra revenue a year. The only question you have to ask yourself is, if you build this extra bedroom, can you service the loan to pay the cost of building it on $5,000 a year? Well, right now interest rates are about 5%. Back then they were about 10%. So at 10% interest, you could borrow $50,000 such that the extra money the tenant would pay, $5,000 a year, would cover it. So I could afford to spend $50,000 building this bedroom and I'd break even. And the quote came in back then at $33,000 for the bedroom. So I confirmed that. I said, yes, if you want to stay, pay the $400 extra, I will build you the extra bedroom. I did that. And now I want you to think for a moment, what changed? What went up in value? Did the value of the house go up? Yes, the value of the house went up by about $100,000, more than the $33,000 cost of building the bedroom. So the value of the house went up by about $100,000. My equity went up by about $67,000. That's the increased value of the house, less the loan I had to take on to build it. So that went up. My cash flow went up. Yes, I know I only got $5,000 extra a year, $4,800, but I had to pay interest on the loan. Well, 10% on $33,000 was $3,300 from the $48,000. I was still ahead. My cash flow went up. My equity went up. My collateral went up. Everything went up. But there's one thing I haven't mentioned yet, and that is my tenant appreciation went up. And it went up because you can bet your bottom dollar that if he had any friends looking to rent a place, he'd say, oh my gosh, see if Dolf's got a place available. I'd tell you what happened to me. I told him I had to leave. Didn't even tell him well. I said, I'm not renewing, I'm leaving. And he asked me why. And when I told him I needed a bigger house, he said, well, I can make my house bigger. Would that work for you? And I did. And would you believe it? He built a bedroom for it. What kind of a landlord is that? Is that not cool? And you all know now that even though it did help him out, and I'm happy that it didn't exactly hurt me. You see, often there can be a win-win situation. And you find out about these things by reading. Well, you're finding out about them by listening to a podcast now. But in general, reading is such a good thing to be doing. So if you do that late at night, instead of scrolling through mindless screens of whatever you're looking at, whatever the app is that will determine what your mind goes to sleep on, if you go to sleep thinking of things you can do to enhance your real estate portfolio, what you can do to make your tenants happier and therefore willing to stay longer, I'm telling you, my average tenant staying rate is 8.7 years. They stay for an average of 8.7 years when you look across the spectrum of my commercial tenants and my residential tenants. And, that kind of speaks volumes. So if you go to sleep thinking of these things, you'll figure out things that you can do to enhance your ability to retain tenants. And that is just one of the great things I think there is. So these secrets of the rich that we're talking about. One is to have integrity with your interactions. And to the extent that you do, you'll have more better things happen to you. And number two is read more. Because the more you read, the more you'll expand your mind as to possibilities, turns of phrase, vocabulary, things that you can do. Here's what I love about reading. You can read an autobiography or a biography for that matter, and it might take you 3 hours to consume that biography. And the book might have cost you $30, usually a lot cheaper these days. But let's say you invest $30 and 3 hours of your life, and if you're a slow reader, 6 hours. That's 1 hour a night for not even a week. If you read that book, then you can get the essence of someone's entire life. It's their biography, after all, in 6 hours. And you can reap the benefit. You're not reading about all the mistakes they made. They might write about some of them, but it's not a book about mistakes. So you're not going to get that negative energy. You're just reading about things that went well. And, seen in that light, suddenly it becomes a very appealing thing to read books. I keep saying, and I've said it before, you just need one idea from a book, and that idea can set you free. It's books that got me started on the path I was on. I met recently with a good buddy of mine, Robert Allen, And it was his book that got me going. Back in the early 80s, I think, he had a book called Nothing Down. And he since had one, I think, Nothing Down in the 90s and Nothing Down in the 2000s. The principles still apply. The principles of my books, which are now decades old, my first books, they are still valid. And that is such a contrast to my normal life and with what I did outside of the real estate realm. I studied, most I studied electrical engineering. I did it for 8 years. I got a PhD in electrical engineering. Not the easiest topic around. And I studied things like the operating characteristics of valves. And I'm not talking about faucet type valves. I'm talking about valve radio style valves. Some of you probably haven't even heard of a valve radio. And then we went on to transistors and then integrated circuits and then VLSI, very large scale integrated circuits, and then ASICs, application specific integrated circuits. And everything I learned at engineering school, almost everything, has been made redundant by new technology. And yet what you might have learned 50 or 100 years ago about real estate still applies. Collateral is still collateral, equity is still equity, a mortgage is still a mortgage. And you invest in real estate and it can go ahead. Here's another reason why real estate is a good thing to, and not real estate, that too, of course, but reading is good. Because I've got articles which are in reputable magazines like Time magazine, which quote that investing in real estate is no longer a sound investment and is not the sure bet that it once was. And this is an article from 1947. Or how about an article from Business Week in 1969, another reputable magazine, that's saying the era of capital growth in real estate is over. And the point is, even when it's something that tells you not to do real estate, which these articles kind of did, reading about them are good because that gives you perspective. That for decades they've been saying it's not a good investment, and yet it turns out to be a great investment. If you or anyone bought a property in 1947 or in 1969 or 1973 or even 10 years ago, they will curse themselves that they didn't buy a second property. So my point is that having integrity is great and reading a lot is great. They're underrated. Just try it. Try it for a month. A diet of integrity and reading a lot. And I think your mind will be expanded so much that you'll never go back to the situation where you think, nah, I don't need to read. I've learned all I need to learn in life. I learned all I needed to know in kindergarten, in junior high school, and high school, and for some of you, university. And the learning has stopped. I'm just going to exploit what I know. That is nonsense. Kids these days, in 10 years' time, will have jobs that don't even exist today. We don't even have names for those jobs today. That's how fast the world is moving. And if you want to find out in which direction the world is moving, I recommend that you read more, because you won't just find it watching soap operas and going on some apps. Some apps are good, but some apps are just mindless. They're there to draw you in and keep you in. So with that, I want to thank you for being here. And remember, there's nothing like learning more. Readers are leaders. He who does not read has no advantage over he who cannot read. Why that is the male gender version, I don't know, but it works for everyone. So, just get out there and read. You'll never learn less. The mind, once expanded to a new dimension, can never be put back into its original form. Once you learn something, you can't unlearn it. You'll never learn less. Have integrity with what you do and get out there and read some more. See you soon. Thank you so much. And in the meantime, I want to wish you, as always, successful investing. Thank you.